We welcome you all. This morning is Saturday, March 31st, 2018. We are having our Bible study this morning, and we are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning our moderator is Tom from New York.
Well, hello and welcome, Tom. I'm going to start out by reading, usually we have a text here. This is from the Christian Science Hymnal. Happy the man who knows his master to obey, whose life of love and labor flows where God points out the way. Rise to every task, soon as the word is given. He doth not wait nor question ask when orders come from heaven. God's will he makes his own, and nothing can him stay. His feet are shod for God alone, and God alone obey. Give us, O God, this mind, which waits but thy command, and doth its highest pleasure find in thy great work to stand. So hymn 92, the words are by Thomas Cogswell Upper.
Thank you.
Yes. Good.
So if you want to be happy, this is the formula, right?
Yeah, very true.
Don't diddle around and let God speak.
Very good for this topic today. Thank you.
Is anybody out there who would like to just kind of give us their thoughts on what this means to them or what they got out of this? Be interesting to find out what people think.
I like that we don't ask, we just obey first, even if we don't understand.
I like that too, for myself.
That's a wonderful point. It's one of the most difficult things for most of us to get to, I think, is to be so humble and willing to obey before we understand why. Because that is how you understand, is through obedience.
Well, the obedience comes before the understanding in most instances. Mrs. Eddy rebuked someone once when they said, well, they would obey when they understood, and she said, no, you obey now. You'll understand after. You have to have that faith and trust to take the leap of obedience.
I think it's evident in the healings Jesus did, some of them. He would say, your faith has made you whole. I mean, first, the acceptance, they accepted whether they understood or not. So.
Thank you, and that's why when, people balk when they'll ask them to read the lesson or something like that, and why do I have to do that? That holds back the healing process. Just obey, then you'll find out why.
I also looked up the word shod in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and one of the definitions was equipped with shoes. And I kind of like that idea that God equips us with protection for a long journey, and if we're going over a rocky path, we have sturdy protection.
Yep.
Thank you. Very good.
I like trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding, and in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths, from Proverbs 3.
Very good. Very good. And what is it that would keep us from trusting in the Lord, or would keep us from having the faith that would make us whole?
Maybe worrying about what other people think or how they're going to react.
Yep.
And pride.
And what is right? That is pride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and one of the biggest barriers to having this faith is when you do not acknowledge all the good that God has been doing for you day by day. When error tries to trick you, and when you've had a wonderful healing, and it would try to trick you into saying, oh, it would have happened anyway, or, well, maybe I wasn't really sick after all, or whatever other thing the voice tells you. And it happens. I've heard about it this week. And when that happens, then you wonder why you don't have any faith. And then when the next challenge comes, you cower and you think there's no God. Well, it's because you weren't and aren't grateful for all the many blessings that He's already bestowed on you. Some of the readings that Elizabeth gave on Wednesday, they were scathing, weren't they, from Mrs. Eddy, about ingratitude and how absolutely, she said, the worst hell would have to come on somebody to wake them up from that state of thought. So, if you talk about not having any faith or trust, ask yourself, have you already acknowledged fully and sincerely and deeply what God has already done for you, or are you just shrugging it off and going on to the next problem? It's a sin, and that's why Mrs. Eddy gave it such a scathing rebuke in those readings on Wednesday.
It makes me think of that transposed testimony at the end of Science and Health, where the whoever it is, C.B. Webb, answered with, "Thus I have progressed a little way in the knowledge of God, good, as revealed in Christian Science." I think ending it like that really kind of belittles a little what he had gained, or she gained.
It absolutely does. Thank you, Florence. She's talking about fruitage and how the BOD changed the order of the testimonies to end on one that belittles the tremendous power that Science and Health gives. And the one that Mrs. Eddy ended on, as we talked about last week, and you can listen to it if you weren't here, and dynamically with a wonderful, wonderful healing transformation of a life.
From darkness to light.
From darkness to light, that testimony. This is what must be in everyone. And if you don't have it, you're in the human mind, and you will continue to get buffeted around until you acknowledge sincerely what God has done for you. And after you've had a healing, you do not dilute it and just shrug it off or say it would have happened anyway, or wasn't really sick in the first place, or whatever, however else it tries to water it down. This is why people have no faith. They haven't seen what God's doing for them this very moment. It's a two-way street, you know. God can't keep pouring these blessings while we just shrug it off and complain about our problems and never give thanks for all He's done.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, and the many little so-called things that we take for granted. So.
Yeah, they're not so little after all,
No,
if you recognize that it's God caring for you.
And if you lost it, you'd be the first one whining and complaining about all these little things. And you know it's darn true. You lose your power, electricity, you can't wash your clothes. This is terrible. But day after day after day, we have all these blessings bestowed on us. And then when something goes wrong, a person will say, why did God do this to me? Why did God let this happen to me? Hello?
Now, this reminds me of the devil's auction on our website. The one tool that the devil is holding on to is discouragement, but he can't use it on someone with a grateful heart. And
Thank you.
It's perhaps the greatest of all attributes is gratitude, sincere gratitude. It'll keep you chugging away.
It'll keep you safe.
Yes, it will. That's why, as Eddie said, when I see a grateful student, what?
Safe.
They say, no, I know they're safe. And I see it too. When I look out and I know who's truly grateful or who isn't, and sometimes those who really aren't, they end up drifting away.
I think also those who are really grateful respect the office of the practice, that it is God and not man.
Thank you very much.
That's right.
It says in the beginning of Science and Health, nothing's either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That might not be exact, but that's the gist of it. And I remember years...
Shakespeare.
That's William Shakespeare.
Yes, thank you. Years ago, we had a big hurricane come through here, Isabel, and there were a huge number of trees down, and the only way to get in or out of our area was residents just got their chainsaws out and cleared the roads, and then for days we had no power, and it was actually a glorious time. All the neighbors got together. We shared everything. We had meals outside together. And I was actually kind of disappointed when the power came back after almost a week, because it was such a wonderful, loving, sharing time, and we all benefited from each other.
That's lovely. That's the brotherhood of man.
Yeah, and there are stories like that all over the place. There are lots of stories. Houston, when Houston was neighbors rolling up their sleeves and helping one another and getting lives back on track. Lots and lots of stories like that.
And that's also why your happiness is not dependent on how much you have, but how much you love. And that's a wonderful example of it. You might have all this and live in a great big house, but you're living to yourself and for yourself. You have an experience like this where you all pitch in and love each other, and it's the greatest thing in the world, because love is the greatest thing in the world. Thank you, dear.
Okay. So, go ahead. Go ahead.
Fairly?
Yes. I just said the heart and soul of Christian Science is love.
Thank you.
So our topic today is in everything, give thanks. So our first question here is, who is Jesse?
Jesse was King David's father, and he was also the grandson of Ruth and Boaz.
And the great-grandson of Rahab from Jericho.
Good. So is there any significance to, you were talking about the lineage of Jesse, or the lineage of David, you might say? What?
He had a good grandmother to teach him, to get him straight.
That's right. And so, and not a Jew. So there's a lot in the Old Testament and, of course, in the New Testament about God's Word is for the Jews and the Gentiles, for everybody. So it's kind of like the blessed lineage of David. You know, it's here to bless everybody, not just some particular group.
Yeah, I'd read one of the commentaries saying it was a symbol of a grander narrative, a blessed lineage, a beacon of hope for all who choose to call upon the name of the Lord, young and old, Jew and Gentile, slave and free. So thank you, Tom. That was a beautiful thought and question. I hadn't really seen that or known that, the variety that came from King David, his lineage. It's a beautiful thought.
Yeah, again, no respecter of person.
no respecter of persons.
Exactly. Yeah.
He was a farmer, a sheep breeder in Bethlehem from the tribe of Judah. Jesse was 8 sons, and his youngest was David. And even at that, we know the story. He thought all the other sons would be more likely to be king than the youngest one. And also, I thought the beauty of the story of Ruth, her faithfulness. Think of that. Think of that faithfulness, and that led to all this tremendous good and how greatly she was blessed.
Right. But also, I'm sorry.
Well, just remember to be faithful. God preserves the faithful. It's a tremendous quality. It goes along with gratitude. Those who are willing to stay through storm or shine, pure peace is thine, whate'er betide. Go ahead.
I was going to say how even to think of Rahab. Wasn't Rahab the so-called prostitute during that time? And yet it doesn't matter.
And what was she? She was Boaz's mother or grandmother?
It's Jesse's great-grandmother.
Jesse's great-grandmother. There again.
Oh, you know.
And she helped. She was pure. It's incredible, really, the whole thing. So that was a great question. Thank you. Yeah, she was a prostitute, but she helped put it. It was Joshua, right? And
yes.
Okay. Yeah, she was willing.
Hid them.
Hid them, right? All these blessed stories.
I was thinking that this also shows that the Christ appears throughout all time too.
It sure does.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
And it's the story of Mary Magdalene coming in to anoint Jesus' feet.
A little bit later.
But I was also thinking about the appearance of Christ throughout all times. It appears in ways that may not have been the expected form. And this is the thing that's gotten so many people into trouble, saying, yeah, I'm expecting a Christ, but it's got to be just like this. Otherwise, it's not the Christ. Well, that's not so.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the trouble.
They don't recognize the Christ. Make sure we're recognizing the Christ in each other, the good in each other, seeing it and bringing it out.
And that was the great value of his grandmother and his great-grandmother, is they all had a clear and strong spiritual sense. That Ruth recognized in Naomi a Christliness, and she clung to it. It's that strong, clear spiritual sense and faithfulness, as Mary mentioned, faithfulness to the Christliness.
So I wanted to say that I asked a question like that about Jesse, just to kind of give you some idea of how I think that we should look at our regular Bible study. So I learned something rather interesting when I visited the Picasso Museum in Barcelona a few years ago. It shows the early works of Picasso. Now, I think we're all familiar with him, and we can think all sorts of things about the guy. But just to give you an example, my dad worked for a company. They were turning around an old manufacturing company into a modern electronics company, and they built a big corporate campus, which at that time was revolutionary. Companies hadn't really started doing that. And they bought a Picasso statue. It was 50 tons, white cement. It was 28 feet high, 15 feet wide. It was absolutely incredible. A lot of people were up in arms over it. It was called the Bather as a woman. But that's kind of what I thought of as Picasso. I didn't know what to think of it. I'm not someone who likes art or knows much about it. But I went to this museum in Barcelona, and I learned that Picasso studied the arts. He did everything. He learned every aspect of artwork. You sit here for a long time I limited myself to one color. Now, it's in this museum, this blue period. Everything was blue. But he said he did that as a form of discipline. So the sort of genius, some people might say, about Picasso didn't come just because he just thought, I'm going to put something crazy together. He was disciplined. He worked hard at the art. He did that from a little kid, and that's all he did. He spent many hours doing that. He learned all the fundamentals. We want to get the inspired word out of the Bible. Well, that's great, but we also need to understand about being disciplined, learning the Bible, learning the fundamentals. We want to be people who are really confident about the Bible. We know it. And then when we feel inspired, we have an absolutely solid foundation for what we're saying. Anyway, that's my editorial for today.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, it's true. That's why we're doing these
That's
Bible
why we do
studies.
what we do.
So we do have a knowledge and can say when error tries to confront us, it is written, and refer to what we've learned.
No, and to your point, there's a reason why the Bible is called the chart of life. It does have the answer to every question that anybody could ever have. It's just that you've got to, sometimes you have to read it inspired to get the answer, because it was written with inspiration.
I do like that idea of the constant study and the being disciplined about it. Because there was another story about Picasso where somebody asked him to draw something and he drew it. And she asked how much it would be, and he said $4,000. And she said, it only took a couple minutes. He says, no, it took my whole life to do that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Yes, and that's how we can get inspired with the Bible. It may come quickly, just like you were saying about Picasso. But that's from a foundation of, studying and working hard and being disciplined. A lot of value to that.
Right.
And when we need it, it'll be there because we put the work in.
Very true.
Thank you. And the discipline of being grateful, and the discipline of being humble,
And being faithful.
These are all disciplines. And they come more naturally to some people, but we all have to work at it.
This might be a good time for me to share what I found then in the Bible while I was doing this. I had read and paid attention that at the Passover, at the Last Supper, they sang a hymn. I thought they sang a hymn. And then I went further, and it said it was hymn from the Bible. It was Psalm 115 to 118. So I looked it up. And it's easy to memorize 117. But in 118, I was floored. At 22, it said, the stone which the builders refused is become the head stone of the corner. Right there in the Psalms. And we hear it all the time. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Thank you. Sure. I knew they sang a hymn, but I didn't know which one. Thank you.
Anything more about Jesse?
Yes, the name means wealthy. One dictionary, Smith's dictionary, says it means wealthy. And Easton's dictionary says it's gift. So the name Jesse means something too.
He was blessed with the wealth of spirituality, wasn't he?
Yeah.
In Psalm 103, that's attributed to David, on line 13, he said, like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. And I just wondered if maybe that was a little window into the love he felt from his father that helped him even understand God's love. Like Mrs. Eddy often speaks so tenderly of her mom.
I'm sure.
That's good.
I'm sure.
Good insight there.
Okay. So our next question, what do we know about Golgotha?
The phrase was the place. It means the place of the skull. And I was looking up one of the somewhere else in Biblos, and it said it was the same word as Calvary, meant the same thing. I thought that was interesting.
And what does Calvary mean?
The place of the skull had to do with the skull.
Oh, okay.
And there seemed to be, in some places that I looked up, they were saying that it had to do with, one place couldn't make up their mind what it really meant, whether it was something that looked like a skull, like a formation of a rock, like it said in other places. Another one just said, well, it's the place where they apparently did executions and so forth. So apparently it had to do with the formation of a rock that looked like a skull.
I always thought it was that right outside of Jerusalem, where it was kind of a Roman graveyard for executions of criminals and political enemies.
And it is.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody got a decent burial. It was just kind of a big pit there.
And it was very visible to passersby right outside Jerusalem gate.
Make you think twice about going in.
Yeah, make you think twice of disobeying the Roman Empire or whoever. Did you see it, Tom?
No, actually I didn't. I think I walked near it. I just probably wasn't sure what I was looking at.
A lot of these places now, these places, they build churches, and it is hard to see what's what, the way it once looked, perhaps.
Especially since tourists like to take rocks and things as they leave.
They do.
So if it looked like something before, it probably doesn't now.
I heard one guy say he referred to the rounded top of a head that was the shape of the hill. Somebody built a church on top of it. They actually showed a picture of the area. It didn't really look like it was much of a hill, but it was all developed. The church was in the middle.
Yeah, that's kind of what I saw, too.
Houses and everything else around.
It's where the crucifixion took place.
Okay. So coming out of our lesson, I had never really even thought about this, so I'm sure I read it many times. So I thought it'd be interesting to ask this question. What can we learn, or what is the lesson about the saints that rose and appeared to many?
In Matthew Henry, it said that death to the saints is but sleep to the body, and the grave is their bed, and that they were buried in the land of Canaan, which was the promised land, and that all benefit by the resurrection, the victory of Christ's cross over the power of death. And all saints rise from the death of sin to the life of righteousness.
I thought this was a spectacular question, and it only appears in Matthew. He's the only one that recorded this event, this earthquake that happened. But obviously there were those, including Matthew, that observed that it happened. They came up. Evidently there was a bodily form. he went on to explain that it was after Jesus' ascension, I believe. But of course, here's Matthew writing his gospel some years after the fact. I don't know exactly how long, but he put this in. And, it might seem miraculous to some, but it's not a miracle to God to do these things. And also I found that in Paul, he went on to further explain in 1 Thessalonians 4, that I would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them which sleep, that ye sorrow not. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring to him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is just proof that it's true. Proof that there is no death.
Yeah, Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead before he was raised himself from the dead, and shows how powerful this experience was, evidently, in the earthquake, and it was rocking all the graves, and so the dead came up, were alive. And I mean, why not? I looked up saints. I mean, a definition of the saints are those who are sanctified or set apart as holy, meaning all of God's true followers. It was also those who suffered martyrdom. So, but then I thought, I looked it up in Spurgeon, and he said something interesting about, see what marvels accompanied and followed the death of Christ. The earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened. Thus did the material world pay homage to him whom man had rejected, while nature's convulsions foretold what will happen when Christ's voice once more shakes not the earth but also heaven. These first miracles, wrought in connection with the death of Christ, were typical of spiritual wonders that will be continued till he comes again. Rocky hearts are rent, graves of sin are opened. Those who have been dead in trespasses and sins, and buried in sepulchres of lust and evil, are quickened, and come out from among the dead, and go unto the holy city, the New Jerusalem. And I remember in our classes with Mrs. Evans, that was one of the definitions. You know, dead doesn't necessarily mean dead in a grave. There are a lot of people who are walking around who are dead.
Spiritually dead.
Spiritually.
Walking dead.
The walking dead. And in, I found something in miscellaneous documents by Mrs. Eddy where Mrs. Eddy once told us we could tell a person's eye when they were under mesmerism. The eye looks dead, no life in it. Now you think about that.
We even have a word for it, don't we? Zombie.
Really?
Really?
Huh.
Like that insurance. Oh.
Haven't you seen that? I mean, haven't you sometimes looked at a person and their eyes look dead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a blank.
It's a blank.
Yeah.
They're under a thick mesmerism. They are the walking dead. And this Christ comes to rouse that dead. And you think of the definition of church, rousing the dormant understanding. Don't ever let your eye be dead.
Yeah, I think what you were saying, and when you mentioned Lazarus, when I look at this, I think this is a lot of what the lesson this week was talking about. You know, it says here in the responsive reading, I'm the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. So, you know, Jesus was resurrected. However, what I think this is telling us is that, yes, but the resurrection is for all of us. And in mentioning Lazarus, this happened before Jesus was resurrected. So you can go back to Elijah and Elisha and, you know, and find other cases, people being raised from the dead. And resurrection can also not necessarily mean just being raised from the dead, but waking us up. So to me, the resurrection, this is for all of us, for all time. It's ongoing. And that's kind of what it's telling me.
Thank you. And that's exactly right.
Yeah, because and what does Mrs. Eddy say about resurrection?
Spiritualization of thought.
Yeah. Basically, it's awakening out of unreal beliefs, isn't it? It's the awakening out of an unreal belief. Jesus taught it, and he proved it. And here all the saints came out of the graves to show what Jesus was proving. God doesn't hide himself from us. He's making it pretty plain.
This question, of course, made me think, which is a good thing, but also many times I think we've all experienced, you know, you have contact with a spiritually minded person, and the benefit of it is it awakens or enlivens or quickens some moral sense within. And you feel more alive and more encouraged in the truth. And something has been resurrected. Something of our original and true nature has been brought to light again. So it's an ongoing process, like Thomas said, and some of the others as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Matthew Henry made this very interesting point, which was kind of in between the readings that Tom had given us, but it was in reference to Judas, that after Judas felt guilty, he went to the people who had enticed him to betray Jesus, and he got as a reward that he committed suicide, whereas if he had actually gone to Jesus and truly repented, the outcome would have been completely different.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Judas personalized the error, didn't he?
They personalize the good. It's a very dangerous sense of personalizing. Thinking either good or evil belongs to people. The only good is God, and any error is animal magnetism, not the truth.
It's a darn lie. Whereas Mrs. Evans used to say, it's a goddamned lie.
And I'm not swearing.
And I'm not swearing.
She used to love to say that.
There was a point in that Matthew Henry mentioned when the resurrection happened and the graves opened, that Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, he yielded up the ghost. He was noting that he cried with a loud voice. He said when people are dying, typically they're very weak and they have a very soft voice. It just shows that the Christ was in command. He was doing this in obedience of his own will to the will of God, and shows the power of God and the Christ through this whole thing.
Thank you. That's a good point, Neil.
I mean, the Christ never died anyway, so it's
Never
like,
did.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Good point.
was very fascinated that the earthquake happened, and then the temple, was sort of cracked in two, because we had that story a while ago about the king that went in and tried to burn incense, and they were trying to get him out, and then the same thing happened. So it just seems like a, kind of a warning, or pay attention. This is not right. This war between spiritual and material desire.
It says the veil of the temple was rent, and I sort of think of it in terms of some kind of curtain or something.
Well,
yeah.
The veil is a covering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a covering that would prevent people from seeing what is truly there.
Like the mist.
Like the mist.
That's why in this work that we do for Christian Science, we are lifting the veil, this covering that has people not seeing it clearly or understanding it. That veil must be lifted in order to see it, the true sense of it revealed.
This was on the temple, and all too often in these institutionalized religions, there's a sense of self-righteousness about, it's a humanized sense of what's good, and that has to be removed. You can see the Christ, regardless of what form it really takes, even if it comes through a prostitute, Rahab. And we're also talking about, the dead rising out of graves. There's just one more statement from Science and Health, one that I'd like to mention frequently, where Mrs. Eddy also clarifies it, that mortals waken with bodies unseen to those that think they have buried the body. That statement's helped me many times.
Thank you.
This is great. So our next question is, what does Jesus ask us to do? Would someone like to volunteer and just read Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20, please?
Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I had commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the world. Amen.
Thank you. That's very important. Thank you, Tom. This is what you're being ordered to do. The Christians call it the Great Commission, and that's it's referring to these orders. And the commission is the thing committed, entrusted, or delivered, and the authority given. So we should have the authority. So go through what are each things we have to do.
Teach all nations, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all things.
All things, yep, whatsoever I have commanded you. So, are we doing that?
And that was my question, really. I mean, what's the elephant in the room? What are we doing? As a church, what are we doing?
Well, thank God for the internet. I think we're doing it not physically present everywhere, but it's reaching everywhere more than we know.
Well, Mark says, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And that's what we're doing with the internet.
I think we're doing it with the Bible study, the
round table and our watches also.
And I think even more so, our own testimonies are examples of the truth. And that's also reaching the world.
Thank you, Florence. Testimonies of healing. When you open your heart and thank God for what He's done, that reaches more hearts than anything else.
That's by their fruits ye shall know them. And that's why it's so important that you give clear testimonies of healing, not murky ones where we're wondering what really happened, but clear. If you need to write it down and prepare it beforehand, you should. And never anything on politics or something other than true healing. Sure, you all get the point. If you ever, we will cut you off. We will edit you. We will do whatever we have to. But please, we had 130 people listening live Wednesday. Your testimony should be right. And if you pray over them, and if you are truly grateful, they will be. And if they don't have to be fancy, but just from the heart.
Well, I'd like to hear more. I mean, I think someone listening in who doesn't know much about it might think we just do a modicum of teaching all nations, but I think what we do is just absolutely awesome. We do so much. But, I think people should know that. They don't know us. We do a lot.
Thank you. I'm so grateful.
In many ways.
Yeah, Tom is always so grateful in those points. Thank you, Tom. It's true. And most new people are floored by it.
Yes.
Don't get used to it where you take it for granted. They can't believe what's on our internet.
And they do express, the wonder, you see.
They do. Why it has to be such of the highest standard and purity. And there are not that many people that are producing all this, which shows it's the power of God. It would have to be. It would be humanly impossible to do everything that goes on here.
And those
I just threw it. Oh, go ahead.
And those of you, and it's many of you, who are helping in what we do, whether it's writing or proofreading or whatever, or testifying, or you can feel God at work. You can sense that there is something divine going on here. This is not a human activity that we're involved in. You can also feel the resistance to it, understand the need to pray before, during, and after. This is all a wonderful discipline. But it's the discipline of getting rid of human pride, human ingratitude, unfaithfulness, and yielding my will to God's will. And there's nothing in the world that can make any of us any happier.
I like the, we just read that section from a couple of verses from Matthew, and at the end it says, "And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the world." And it was, the Christ is with all of those that are doing this work and leading us.
Thank you. Yes.
Yep. Exactly.
That Christ is still with us. Thank you. As is Mrs. Eddy. She said that's something I read a few weeks ago. She was with the second and third, fourth generations who were doing this work of Christian Scientists. with us on the battlefield. But it is, because sometimes I see other churches, they have all of this stuff they're doing with people, missionary work and schools, all of that, which is, to my knowledge, I don't know whether, even when Mrs. Eddy was around, we ever did anything like that. It's always been more the mental work. I don't know if anyone speak to that, but it sure as heck means we better be doing this work and supporting it, and supporting Jeremy and what he does on the internet. And that's why our Saturday watches are going to change a little bit, and that this word is getting out, and that there's no resistance to science and health. We better be doing that. You're not being asked to go to some foreign country and live on rice for 3 months. What we're doing is highly important, but it has to be done, and you can't just get complacent in our own little comfortable world.
One thing I'd like to express that I think is very profound about Plainfield, I was reading in one of Mrs. Eddy's writings in Prose Works. I can't tell you which chapter now, but it was called under Is There Any Such Thing as Sin? She writes the familiar quote that we know. Quote, if the Bible and my work, Science and Health, had their rightful place in schools of learning, they would revolutionize the world by advancing the kingdom of Christ. And then there it goes on, this is the part that's even profound to me. It requires sacrifice, struggle, prayer, and watchfulness to understand and demonstrate what these volumes teach, because they involve divine science with fixed principle, a given rule, and unmistakable proof. And end quote. And for me, this is what the power of the baptized teaching and preaching really, to me, came down to living it and teaching others to live it. And one thing that's so honestly done at Plainfield that you really don't find, at least under the other model of Christian Science, is that this sense of sacrifice, struggle, prayer, and watchfulness, and this fixed principle. And then we show this fixed principle in our testimonies. But it's advancing the kingdom of Christ. And to me, it's this whole idea of living it that makes the difference, and how to live it moment by moment and by days, and it transforms your life in profound ways. And to me, that's the preaching and teaching and baptizing that's going on.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. And that quote is from Noah, yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate prayer in the daily prayer, where we are also to say, and may thy word enrich the affections of all mankind and govern them. So we pray that prayer every day.
We do, and that's a powerful treatment for all mankind. Very, very important. All of these things, if we're doing it with all our heart, mind, and soul, as Tom brought out with the story of Picasso, it's all this training and discipline, as well as mainly the unction of love and spirit behind it. The tremendous power. It's all power because it's the power of God. So we must be doing it and not be sleeping.
I'm certainly grateful that you were doing the work all those years, because I was pretty zombie-ish for a long time. And I'm sure that is the only reason I'm here, is because that work was being done.
Thank you. And we are getting new people every day. Every day people are finding us. And that's due to this prayer. We don't market. We're not advertised. We have advertised in USA Today, but we haven't done that in a long time. And I do think Mrs. Eddy did it all by prayer and word of mouth and healing. And those who are right will find us. And we can awaken those dead to the sins. and awaken and fulfill Mrs. Eddy's definition of church, which is a powerful statement. We all should know it. But, so important. Otherwise, why bother? There's no reason to have any of this. We're not doing that. This is the Great Commission. And it's wonderful that all of these questions are wonderful, Tom. And I'm always so grateful. Tom is always so grateful for church. Yeah, what's going on? It's very refreshing to hear his enthusiasm.
I'm very grateful for this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, for the Bible study and these questions, because I've spent several hours researching and studying the Bible and the commentaries, and it's just wonderful what it's opened up, and it just is so much more meaningful to me. So thank you.
That's very true. The Bible studies are amazing.
So I wanted to mention something. I think this is, part of the complex of things that we do to teach the members in the world. But let's just take the song from the Messiah that Jared did. That is so beautiful. And we have this posted on our website. You know, we're not just doing like a Bible study, an article. I mean, that is just a beautiful song.
Yes. I think he means the one John sang, Jared played, yes.
Yeah, comfort you,
my people, and then he, very, very.
Yeah, John and Jared, I guess. Okay.
John and Jared.
Yeah.
And it was, it's interesting you mentioned that, because after he sang it, when we were all together in the foyer, he told us a little story about his singing. And he mentioned that when he sang that song in our church, he totally let go. It was the first time he ever sang anything where he didn't feel like he had to control his voice, where he just let God use him. And he said, because usually a professional singer will control, to make sure they're not singing too loud or singing too high or whatever. But he said this time he just let go.
Yeah, he let God use him, and he said he felt like a messenger. And that is what Tom was saying, a messenger.
And that's what you feel when you listen to it.
Yes.
Yes, beautiful.
God giving his message to his people. And that's what all of this should be about. That's what, when you testify, it's God giving his message to his people. When you do a reading for Wednesday, God giving his message to his people. These Bible studies, it's God's message to his people. The round tables, our services, everything, our watches, God's message to his people. And when we really work to get ourselves out of the way, it does come through with power. And so we
keep it that way.
Yeah, we work to keep it this way. We're not trying to give ourselves a pat on the back, because this only means we become more dedicated to this work. The power and the importance of it, the Great Commission.
Okay, so we're coming up to the top of the hour. Our last question is, what did the disciples do after Jesus ascended? I think this is going to be a good way to end our Bible study today.
It certainly is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first says, and they were continually in the temple, praising and blessing God.
Are you?
And where is your temple? Your temple is your home. Your temple is your church.
Your thought.
Your temple is your consciousness. So.
And this goes directly back to the beautiful hymn at the beginning that Tom read to us. Happy is the man And then also, in his law doth he meditate day and night. That was Psalms and Thessalonians. Rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks. So ask yourself, are you continually in the temple praising and blessing God? If you're not, you better be. Okay. That was a great thought.
Yeah.
That was the result of all this. You can't hold it back. It was something that Betty said a week or so ago. You can't not do it. You can't not do it. And if you're not doing it, then you're in the wrong mind, and you need to shake yourself. Got those dead eyes. What the resurrection is all about.
And they stayed together in Jerusalem until God directed them to go out and visit other places. But they were strengthened by being together for a while. They supported one another.
The importance of our unity and being together.
And then they had the strength to go and visit other cities. And they went two at a time, 2 by 2. So each one of them always had a partner to support one another.
That's an important thought. I mean, that's why we have a church. Being a Christian isn't an individual thing where you have your Bible and that's how you live your life. I mean, you belong to a community and you support each other.
Yeah, exactly. And Mrs. Evans used to remind us, one stick you can break, but a bundle you can't.
That's so important because we've seen independent scientists go off on their own. And
there's not that much that they can accomplish.
God bless them, but no, I just from your observation, it is so true. It is, people ask how we could do all we've done. It's because we had each other. The bundle was not broken. It could not break us. We were watching each other's back, and we will continue to do just that. And people can poo-poo it and say, oh, no, well, whatever, but by their fruits ye shall know them. And we go on.
So grateful for all of you.
And we're grateful for all of you.
For everybody.
Certainly are. Yep. We are so grateful for every single one of you. So very grateful. We're so grateful you join us today and all the times you join us and all you do to contribute. It's what makes this church what it is. People feel the love. Was what our new friend Russ from British Columbia said. Real people on real time. We're not all virtual. We're real. Thank goodness for that. Oh, this was a wonderful session, Tom. Really good question.
Yeah, thank you.
So well
Thank you.
Grateful for.
Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.